as I'm probably the least familiar with Martin, we will probably let you all introduce yourselves later, or introduce Martin. But basically, we're going to go through this evening. Martin's got a presentation together, which is all about a guide to pre-owned models. And plenty of questions, please. Martin's, well, he's gagging for the questions later, so we're really looking forward to those.
I want to, make me squirm and wiggle, and
that's what we're after. So we'll leave that for we'll get about half an hour in, and we'll get some questions, unless there's any real poignant ones. And just before we get on air, and just in case Martin gets hit, well, his broadband gets hit by lightning, let's put it that way. 2 weeks' time, Andy, we're looking at yourself and Chris Bradbury.
Yes, myself and Chris Bradbury, a little bit on photography drones and forming your own photography drone club, which I've done, and we're having some success with. The sort of things we get up to, and anybody who's interested in advice for getting started, perhaps in a career on drone flying, from Chris. So,
yeah, thank you.
Something a bit different.
We digress, but Martin, back to you, and we'll let you crack on, sir.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the In the Air Tonight presentation, a guide to pre-owned models. By myself, Martin. Now I need to figure out how PowerPoint works on Zoom, so do excuse me, everyone. There we go. So introduction. So many of you knew me as Martin, or when I was buying and selling items, it was Martin Thompson, but the company's name was Radio Controlled Models. But throughout the years, the name had changed. When I started, when I was 10 years old, in buying and selling of model aircraft bits, it was Mars Models. When I was 16 and left school, it changed to Martin's Marketplace. And then just a couple of years ago, I changed the name once more to Radio Controlled Models. But throughout that time, just everyone has known me either through those names or by my own name. I started model flying at the age of 7, and since then the hobby has led me on to...
Oh dear. Martin might have been struck by lightning again.
It may well have taken him off air. Well, we could start compiling some questions now, couldn't we?
Oh, well, there's already one in the questions box, so if anybody's got any for Martin when he returns, type them away in the question and answer box.
Yeah, we had a violent crash earlier from Martin, so it looks like it could well be the same. The screen might go blank here.
Yes, definitely struck by lightning again by the look of it.
You better go and get your guitar, Barry, I think.
Anybody know any jokes?
There we go.
He's likely to return any moment.
So, well, we've got that one question. Have we got any more questions? I mean, favourite Haribos? We could start that going. We're struggling here. We're blagging. We're 1 minute in. We've crashed.
Fantastic.
I don't think you've ever been struck by lightning before in a BMFA ITAT meeting. So, like you say, Mark, we're blagging. Probably if our guests start to pile a few questions up, that would be quite a good thing to do. I do feel fairly confident that he'll come back.
Here he is.
There he is.
I'm back. Oh, we'll get there.
That saved us blagging anymore, Martin.
That's it. The weather's got turned awful. Let's go back to sharing my screen. So there we go. Apologies, everyone. Fingers crossed it doesn't cut out again. So yeah, carrying on. I started model flying when I was 7, and that led me on to a variety of activities linked with volunteering and in Bangladesh. Made lots of contacts and friends throughout the modelling industry. We can't go without mentioning the Channel 4 Battle of Britain Model Squadron programme I did a few years ago. My favourite model aircraft is the P-51, and you'll probably be noticing the slightly damaged model in the photo there, that's a good sign to show that you should always do your pre-flight checks as a bit of entertainment. If I have contact by local newspapers, radio stations, or information about any of my volunteering activities in the media pack, I always send that photo across, and 7 out of 10 times it always seems to get selected and published, which I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. So radio controlled models. This was founded by me at the age of 10, and only recently at the age of 24 I've stopped running the business. We specialized in pre-owned radio controlled model aircraft. So in an average year, we would purchase 200 to 250 job lots, mainly coming up for sale for a variety of reasons, such as someone's packing up the hobby, or for whatever reason they had to stop flying. The 200 to 250 job lots would equate to, in a month, around about 350 to 500 airframes coming through my hand. So in that time, I got to see an awful lot of horror stories with model aircraft, as well as having some truly unique model aircraft passing through my hands. Throughout the years, the business saw continuous growth, but did have to adjust to changing markets. The demand for built model aircraft over the years have slowly dwindled, but the demand for kit and new items have actually surged in demand and popularity, mainly due to the cost of rising raw materials in China, and just the cost of shipping these days. Where it used to cost £3,000 to bring a shipping container over from China, it's now in the region of £10,000 to £15,000. And ironically enough, the demand for IC engines and petrol engines in recent times has also increased due to the cost of LiPo batteries going up. Over the years, the customer base was in excess of 10,000 people throughout the UK, through a variety of sale outlets, and these would range from from entry-level pilots all the way up to show pilots. The main sale outlets were Facebook groups, a variety of eBay stores. So there used to be a plain old bargain. There is a plain old bargain in Northampton, Helibits in Doncaster, Flying Widget Supplies in Driffield, plus much more that I used to, as well as selling directly to customers. I would use the eBay stores mentioned to also move items on as well. For all intents and purposes, radio controlled models is now run by a plain old bargain. Slight digression from this evening, but when I mentioned earlier about my volunteering activities in Bangladesh, I've always been a passionate aeromodeler since the age of 7. So when I had the opportunity to go out to Bangladesh, instead of packing sensible items such as clothes and sun hats and sun cream, I just filled my suitcase with foam chuck gliders and handed them out to local children in Bangladesh, see if they'd share the same passion and interest in model aircraft as I do. And lo and behold, they did. And Chris Otterwell at Aeromodeler was kind enough to do a little write-up about it. So for the main topic of this evening, the sections, part 1 is purchasing and part 2 is selling. The bits I will cover might sound obvious to many of you guys, but around about 70% of the items I purchased had a variety of issues that will be mentioned in the purchasing section. So whether you're purchasing models or just models in your own collection, just give them a once over every now and again, just to make sure they're okay, because we all know safety in the hobby is paramount and key. So for this little subsection, everything's applicable to all models, predominantly fixed wing. So when purchasing models, horns and hinges, too small or not enough fitted to the control surfaces, this would be a fairly common thing I'd come across, where folks would, even on an aileron control surface, only have 2 hinges over the entire length. You could simply waggle the control surface up and down. Brittle, usually caused by UV damage if a model's being stored in direct sunlight from the conservatory or next to the shed window. Poorly fitted, so huge gaps, glue has bunched up around the hinge area. Foam hinges split and poorly taped up. Foam hinges do split. All it takes is for them to fall over or be knocked, and the hinge line will split. One way of fixing it is pulling clear tape over the hinge. But if this isn't done kind of tightly and properly, it will limit movement overall on the control surface. And horn is loose due to the foam being squashed. Horn is loose due to foam being squashed, mainly on foam models, because that's where you get foam control surfaces. Just regular checking to make sure the bolts on the horns are securely tightened up. If necessary, add a small ply plate just to make a little sandwich on the control surface, just to reduce stress and pressure. And if any of you are ever at Weston Park for Wings and Wheels or a show, do have a look at the HSD range of models, because they've managed to solve rather ingeniously all the issues with the foam horns being squashed on their range of models. When purchasing models, always do keep an eye out for push rods and clevises. These are fairly fundamental key part to model flying. So snakes not being secured in the fuselage. This is mainly something I came across with the Sullivan range of snakes, where you'd get the blue outer casing and the yellow inner tube. They'd just simply be slid down the fuselage with no supporting or mounting to them. So the slightest bit of pressure or force would simply cause the control surface to waggle backwards and forwards. Weak, so they bend under load. Too short, leaving the clevises with only a few threads each end, many if someone's brushing or trying to cut a corner. And most importantly, no locking nuts. This is quite common on larger models, where instead of having a standard M2 connect with a Z bend, it would just be a length of M3 threaded rod. And under vibration, if it's two metal clevises each end with a threaded rod in the middle, the thread will just simply unscrew and causing you to have some control issues. And old and brittle, so just old and brittle, mainly caused by UV and age-related issues. Undercarriages, moving on to undercarriages, always check with your own models or when purchasing them that the steering wheels aren't jammed or steering wheel isn't bent, as well as having the steering wheel servo reversed. So mainly on foam models, if it's, say, for an example, a Hobby King model, and the servo and the front nose wheel servo get stripped and a replacement servo is fitted, it might act in reverse to the rudder. So although you might want the model to go left on taxiing, it might actually go right. And if that's into the pits or somewhere else that you don't want the model to go, that is not a good thing. Mounting area for the undercarriage has been repaired poorly. I've seen some interesting models in my time. I've even had models where, when I've been test running engines, the undercarriage has just simply fallen off. So make sure the undercarriage region it doesn't have excessive damage, or if it has been repaired, it's been repaired with structural integrity in mind. Cracks in carbon fibre undercarriage. It's quite often carbon fibre undercarriages are expensive to replace. So trying to repair these or ignoring them and pretend they don't have cracks can be quite common. But these little cracks will add up, and over time, if you have one slightly heavy landing or a landing you think is done well, the leg will simply snap off, dig into the ground, and rip the underside of your model off. An undercarriage has been mounted on a weak area. Commonly, this happens with models that have had tricycle undercarriages fitted on them in the first place and converted to tail draggers, and the tail dragging the main undercarriage has just been screwed directly into 3 30-second balsa wood. Bulkheads, this is fairly simple and straightforward, but poorly fitted, can apply to some ARTF models. Not strong enough. Incident angles are wrong. Numerous power plants have been fitted over time, so it looks like they've been attacked by some sort of vicious woodworm, which is never ideal. Crash damage. It's rather. I'm amazed. I've witnessed some of these things with crash damage models, but where they have been repaired and by bulkheads have been snapped in half. actually then being re-glued by bulkheads. Folks attempt to re-glue by bulkheads back together. If that's the case, just simply replace the bulkhead or burn the whole model. Fuel soaked. This is quite useful if you do intend on burning the model, because it will burn quicker. But if a model is excessively fuel soaked, just don't try avoid purchasing it or undertake expensive repairs to resolve the fuel soak issue. Glue joints. Do excuse me. Glue joints, so gaps on the models. Joints are simply held together with a wedge of glue with no overlapping balsa words. Non-suitable glue has been used, so super glue has melted the foam. By far, thin super glue causes the biggest problem when it comes to melting, but thick super glue on foam, although it doesn't melt the foam, it doesn't give the strongest of bonds at times. So it might hold items together, but it can be quite brittle and snap. Covering film hasn't been removed on tail surfaces. As we all know, glue on shiny surfaces is never a good idea. Always carefully cut away the film, but making sure you don't cut it with balsa wood and cut the tail off at the same time. Butt joints on high stress areas. Butt joints in general should be avoided, as we all well know, but I have seen them used on wing joiners, wing spars, bulkheads, and undercarriage mount or other high stress areas. So if you're building a model, or when you're purchasing a model and you notice it's got butt joints, it or core glue joints, just always bear that in mind. Manufacturing defects. Always online forums, Facebook groups, RC groups, these are a marvellous treasure for information. So always check for product recalls. I know in this example, I've utilised a RC car, but it has been known in the past with transmitters, receivers, speed controllers of a variety of brands for them to have product recalls. You might find this information on the website, on the manufacturer's website directly, on the manufacturer's website directly, or on various online forums. Another good one for forums is with the FMS battery hatch problems, where the batteries were just simply sliding out of the models. There was someone on RC groups who was clever enough to design a system where you could just simply 3D print a little locking wedge for the battery, and if you pop that in, that would solve all the problems of the battery coming out. So always check online forums on manufacturers' websites if there's any concerns. Moving on to propellers. Sounds a very common one, everyone, but the amount of electric propellers I've seen fitted to IC engines is fairly horrific. So always make sure IC engines don't have electric props fitted. Propellers mounted backwards. The leading edge of the propeller should always be facing in the direction of travel of the model aircraft. Damage to props, striped hub damage, heavy landings, and the tips have touched the ground. This can cause damage to the tip of the propeller. Also on petrol engines where you've got 6 or 8 bolts holding the propeller on, if these get over tightened, the hubs get crushed and cracked. Poorly balanced. This is fairly simple. Always balance your propellers and make sure they're balanced. Center hole too big for the shaft. This is mainly caused when folks use a step-up prop reamer instead of a tapered one. Center shaft too big for the shaft. We've mentioned that. And locking nuts on 4-stroke engines. It was quite common when purchasing models with engines already fitted to them, with spinners covering the nuts for the engine. If you took out the front half of the spinner nut, the front half of the spinner cone, you would normally find out that there was no locking nuts on. So if the engine ended up backfiring, it would just send a propeller flying your way. Storage damage, by far a big problem. So when purchasing models, especially when purchasing models, if it shows swap meets or bring and buys, be careful to check for rodent damage in the wings. Rodent damage in the wings, rodent damage in the fuselage. If models have been stored in barns, this is all quite a problem. Hanger rash, very common with loading models into cars. But again, if a model falls over in the shed, it doesn't look like it's being damaged, but it can cause areas of stress on the where the model's fallen over. It can cause underlying stress marks on the tail surfaces or wings, which ultimately reduces the overall strength. Structural damage, such as ribs, mainly linked to people being heavy-handed when picking up the models and just poking their fingers through the leading edges. Mold and corrosion, damp and wet conditions can really cause havoc with electronics. Again, you come across something with mold and corrosion on it, don't buy it. Servos. Give me a second. Not suitable for the application. 9-gram servos being fitted to Watt4s with 46 size engines is just a recipe for disaster. Servo wires caught or damaged, so mainly caught in glue joint, or if the glue has run down the fuselage and sticks to the servo cables in the fuselage. When pulled off, the silicone gets removed, leaving bare wires exposed in your airframe. Voltage input is too high. So if a lot of servos are only designed for up to 6 volts and not the voltage of a cell life pack. Non-genuine Futaba servos, these are always entertaining and also a very big issue. Just have a look on RC groups under the section fake Futaba servos for more information about that one. And copies of other makes, such as Tower Pro being rebranded as Toward Pro. More naive aero modelers will think they're getting a bargain, but when you're actually being ripped off, support your local model shop and buy genuine servos and not ones from eBay, unless I was selling them. Electric models. So in this section, it applies to electric models. Power setups, motors and speed controllers not suitable. Again, just use a wattmeter when purchasing a model to make sure the propeller, motor and speed controller setup is suitable for the battery and the airframe you've got. Overpropped, again, use a wattmeter. Check for burning smells, magnets dislodged, live wires exposed. When models, quite common, people will build models during the winter months, and when flown again in the summer, they were set up for the winter. Summer, the ambient temperature is normally 20 or 30 degrees hotter, and this can cause issues with overheating. I once had the pleasure of driving all the way to Frankfurt, which was 550 miles, and the model I was flying, I set up in winter. When I got to Germany, it was 43 degrees, and on the first flight, the motor burnt out. So I had a 1,100-mile wasted journey. Connections overloaded on speed controllers for batteries. XT60 connectors being fitted to 80 amp speed controllers, something again I very regularly came across. And make sure the wiring not suitable, make sure the wires are well suited for the application. Make sure the wiring for the batteries and speed controllers aren't being overloaded. For battery compartments, screws that can puncture the battery, make sure the compartment is free from anything that can puncture the battery. Straps or compartments not strong enough to contain the battery. Make sure the straps are suitable and what the straps are mounted to are also suitable to contain the battery. Now on to glow and petrol models. Hopefully I have not sent everyone to sleep at this point, but moving on to tank installations. Fuel tanks not correctly located in the fuselage. This can have a variety of issues, such as fuel tank being mounted too low and starving the engine of fuel, or if it's mounted too high, you'll simply flood the engine and experience running issues. Tank breather pipes. This is again one that's always entertaining, but whether the breather pipes are blocked up or located in a location where fuel can directly run into the fuselage. Tank too small for the engine. A common rule of thumb for models, if you're building models or purchasing models, or just in general making sure the fuel tank's the right size for the model, is a 2-ounce fuel tank on a 0.10 size engine will give around 7 to 8 minutes of flying. But on petrol, this is a little bit more tricky because it depends on the oil mix being used for the engine. But a general rule of thumb is just under double time for the same amount of fuel for a petrol engine. Wrong fuel lines being used, glow fuel lines being used on petrols. This was a very common thing. Just take a moment to observe the wonderful photo on our screens. That was a 50cc size Corsair. It had a 6-ounce select fuel tank fitted in it with glow fuel lines. And if the model was flown, thankfully too awful, so it would never fly at all, but you would have got around about 2 minutes flight time on that fuel tank. Engine mounts. Always make sure the engine mount is the correct size for the engine. 46 size engine mount has been cut to squeeze a 60 size engine. Make sure the engine mount is the correct size for the engine. Engine mount has had numerous engines fitted to it in the past. As we can see here, this was a model that had seen a fair array of engines in its past. This just overall weakens the entire engine mount and can cause some issues if your engine falls off. Engine mount is brittle, UV damage / age. Just check regularly to make sure no cracks have appeared. Unsuitable fittings have been used to secure the engine mount. Again, in the time, servo screws being regularly used to hold engines on. Just make sure when purchasing or setting up your own models, use suitable bolts with washers and locking nuts. Transmitters and receivers. Fakes. Non-spectrum, non-genuine spectrum receivers are by far the biggest bunch of fakes I've come across. They outweigh any other fakes by quite a considerable margin. If in doubt, general rule of thumb, if in doubt when buying spectrum receivers second-hand, just buy brand new. Don't purchase them second-hand. If you are buying them second-hand, just make sure you know what you're looking for when it comes to them being genuine. If they've got hex heads on the back of the case of the transmitters, if they've got hex heads on the back of the receiver cases, that's an indication that they are genuine. And if they've got posse heads on the back of the cases of the receivers, that's an indication that they can be fake. For more information on this, check on RC groups or online forums, and you'll be able to find more information about there. Receivers always range when purchasing second-hand receivers, always range test the receivers. 30 yards is a good pace for range testing, or whatever the manufacturer's recommendations are. All channels work on the RX. Sometimes channels 1 to 4 might work, but channels 6 to 7 do not work. Sometimes if a channel becomes overloaded during use, such as the retract's not working or the retract servo's jamming, it will burn out channel 5. So just make sure all channels work where you can. No damage on the outside of the aerials. Can easily happen if the aerials get caught around the servo or squashed by the wing mount or super glued in. And again, rust or corrosion, often caused by rain or poor storage conditions. If there's rust on your RX, don't use it. Just get this sign off. There we go. Transmitters. Check that for modern transmitters such as the Jetty or the later Spectrum or the later Futaba range, Fly Sky as well, check they're regularly updated, as a lot of the transmitters these days work on software to make sure that they're the most compatible with the latest receivers that are available. Gimbals are free and moving. It might look a lovely transmitter when it's at a swap meet stand, but if it's being on the ground, being kicked about when someone's been tuning an IC engine, the gimbals will be filled with grit and sand and limit the overall stick movement. 35 no broken switches or trim damage unless specified when purchasing transmitters. Check aerial for damage. 35 megahertz aerial fully extends, and 2.4 gigahertz aerials have fractured them. The early Spectrum DX6 size, DX7s, DX8 all suffered with the aerials being easily broken. So always check these. They might have been taped back together, but if the top of the aerial has been yanked, it can cause connection issues on the RF board and limit overall range. And check the transmitter's output is legal for the country, both frequency and output power. 35 megahertz for fixed wing aircraft, and for 2.4 gigahertz, make sure the output power is within legal regulations. Batteries and chargers. Swollen lipos. If you're thinking about buying swollen lipos, don't buy swollen lipos. They're not a good investment. Swollen LiFi batteries, these are even worse than swollen lipos. If you come across a model with a swollen LiFi battery, or think about purchasing a swollen LiFi battery, the internal resistance of these are very high. So the highly chance of anything happening is your model crashing. Unbalanced cells is a problem. If you notice unbalanced cells when purchasing LiPo batteries, simple, don't buy them. Early LiPo chargers not having balance functions on them. We've all heard horror stories in recent times of people burning their sheds down or burning their houses down. This is just a simple way to alleviate that problem and make sure if you do purchase chargers, they've got the correct balancing functions on them. Poor soldering. Just watch YouTube videos on how to solder correctly and give a practice. Please don't be like some folks I've come across where they've taped, instead of soldering, they've taped connections together, or even worse, someone who tried super gluing wires into it. And battery connections are unsuitable. Mainly Dean's connectors, Tamiya connections were good in the day, but they're a bit dated, old school. Now, for my personal recommendation is to use connections that feature gold bullet connections, whether that's XT60s, XT90s, EC3s, or EC5s, or simply gold bullet connections overall. We can get into the exciting category now, and that is selling your items. So this is for anyone, a lot of us, we've gone through the sections of purchasing model aircraft and what to keep an eye out for. When it comes to selling model aircraft, prices and valuations can always be varying. So this is just my advice and a similar system and approach I used when selling my model, when I came to selling model aircraft in the past. And it was a strategy that worked relatively well. So there's two major factors when selling model aircraft. You've got one, damage, two, missing parts. Key points before we get started. Time. Unless you're being paid to build models, your time unfortunately has no value. So don't factor in time at minimum wage for the past 50 years. I have seen some interesting valuations in my times of part-built models that have price tags of £10,000 a piece on them because of the time used to create part-built models. And being honest, even if you have bench run an engine, it is no longer brand new, and we'll come on to that later on. So, brand new / excellent condition items will usually sell for 50 to 75% of the current RRP. For example, an item that costs £100 when new will usually sell for 50 to 75 pounds. Average condition has a few marks but nothing broken. These will usually sell for 25 to 35% of current RRP. For example, an engine costing £400 will usually sell for £100 to £150. I know that can be quite shocking to hear, but the reality is it is true. Repaired or damaged items. So this can be engines with a repaired exhaust port, servos with broken mounting lugs. There's no real reason to be purchasing those, but if you do, or a brushless motor with a bent shaft, these usually have very little value, around about 50 to 75% of their average condition value. And on our right here, we can see an engine that had only been bench run once from new and then put in the box, where it hadn't had any after run oil fitted into, where it didn't have any after run oil fitted into it, all the bearings corroded and rust. Technology-based items, so these are mainly multi-rotors, FPV equipment. Standard hobby-grade multi-rotors will usually have a value of 10 to 15% of their original RRP. Professional-grade systems can vary between 5 and 15% of their original RRP. I know this is quite shocking numbers to hear. A few years back, I purchased an aerial photography company in South Wales, and I was in charge of selling off all the surplus equipment items. And there were some DJI gimbals amongst a lot that were £3,500 a piece when new. And I was able to get £150 a piece for them from a chap in Zimbabwe after a couple of months of trying to sell them. 35 megahertz gear and old servos, again, 5 to 10% of the original RRP. 35 megahertz, it is still worth noting, however, 35 megahertz gear is still in demand, but has very low value. So what if you can get for it, do take it. The only real difference with a lot of the high-end 35 megahertz gear, in fact, it just runs on 35 megahertz gear and not 2.4 gigahertz. Don't worry, everyone, just 4 more slides to go. Airframes, pristine condition, these will usually sell for 40 or 60% of current RRP. Well flown, but with no damage, 25 to 40% of the current RRP. Airframes that have mold or are fuel soaked or major repairs or have been poorly repaired, or again, part built, commonly have no value. The prices for built ARTF models and kit built models are usually the same, although kits have had a lot of added costs involved, such as covering and accessories that need to be purchased in order to build the model. It doesn't really add any value to it. So the price, the percentage value price of the model is just based on the original kit price. Accessories, spinners, wheels, screws, nuts, bolts, engine mounts, and fuel tanks. When you're selling these usually have little or no value due to most aero modelers already having boxfuls of these. If any of you would have seen me at the shows or bring and buy events over the years, I'd often have boxes filled with these with price tags from 50p to £1.50 in an attempt to simply get rid of them. Last slide. Kits, vintage and collectible items, research is key. The value and prices of these can be hard to price at times due to the value of them being dependent on how many people are looking for that item at any one time. Always have a good look and see what items are selling for, research on eBay or see what past items have sold for to help gauge a rough idea of value. Over the years, however, there's been again more changes in markets where vintage diesel engines used to be very collectible. The demand for these have really tailed off in recent years in value, while brand new kits such as the Flare Puppeteer range or the Flare Scout series have really rocketed in value. Where you can purchase those kits new for around about £69 to £89. They're now selling on eBay for in excess of £250. And that, everyone, really concludes everything I have to say to you this evening. If there's any questions, I'll look forward to answering them. The contact details for radio-controlled models or anything that I used to do is now owned by a plain old bargain. Matthew and Bryony Howe are the people to get in contact with. The email address can be seen on the screen, and the telephone numbers, if you wish to contact them at all, can be found there. So that's it. That really concludes my In the Air Tonight session.
Martin, it's never concluded till you're out the room. But
it's never concluded until I'm out the room.
You're not getting away with it that easy. There are
yes.
There are a good number of questions here, which I imagine will grow as we go through them. So we'll let you compose yourself for a moment before we start on.
That's it. Yes.
But an early one, 6 minutes in. I think this is before Lightning took you out. This is from Andrew Hyams. What's a model you've always wanted and never owned?
Oh, a model I've always wanted but never owned. I think for that would probably be the F86 Sabre. I've had quite a few electric ducted fan versions in the past. I really wouldn't mind one on a larger scale.
Right, excellent. Andrew came back. This is when you were off air. What's your favourite model you've bought from Martin? And that was to us.
Oh, I think that was for the audience, wasn't it?
That was one for the audience. So we'll put that back out for the audience. So if somebody would like to put forward their best model that they bought from Martin, and maybe their worst one because he's not actually trading anymore, might be quite interesting.
Yeah, that's I don't think there are any good ones.
Answers in the chat box for that one.
Scott Edwards, Spectrum or Futaba?
Oh, we're getting controversial here. I personally use, when I started flying, or when 2.4 first came out, it was Spectrum that was easily available. So I've always used Spectrum, but throughout the years, I've sold both Spectrum and Futaba sets. The only real differences with Spectrum and Futaba is the value of Spectrum transmitters have a great second-hand value than comparative to with Futaba transmitters. Futaba transmitters are second-hand value usually sell for less than the Spectrum transmitters, but Futaba receivers will sell for more, and Spectrum receivers will sell for less. So that's the only real difference. Futaba.
Perfect, thank you. Graham Gooch asks, with all your advertising on the BMFA classified, do you have difficulty being contacted or getting messages coming through?
I did experience some technical issues with the BMFA classifieds when it relaunched for the second time, but most of those down to myself as the user error, not having the correct details entered in. And the only word of advice I can give on that is just check the spam folder. But I found the new version of the BMFA classifieds very good. It's new, but once it's figured out, it is a great platform to use.
Andy, I think that's a
well,
that, hasn't it, Andy?
I didn't mean to.
Yeah. No, that's good enough for me.
We're good with that one.
My suggestion is, if you're not getting your messages on the classifieds, move off BT Internet because it's rubbish.
In my case, it's Talk this evening.
Oh, and I have Talk, and they come through for me, okay. But BT Internet is terrible. It has this random thing where it'll randomly select an email and throw it into the ether for no apparent reason.
Oh.
Other providers are crap as well, but we'll accept that as well. Let's right, Philip Elliott. Hi Martin, have you ever flown an autogyro? And if you have, how many blades did it have when you landed?
Oh,
One suspects there's insider knowledge there.
That's it. It sounds like Finn Elliott might have recorded a video of an auto gyro. That was a auto gyro purchased second hand. It just had a slight tumble on landing. So although it landed with the wheels, it landed on its wheels. Eventually, some of the rotors had fallen off throughout the course of the flight. Oops.
Well, these things happen. Scott Edwards, what happened to your Tri-Watt and Concorde?
So the Tri-Watt was a Watt 4 that was created by a chap in Derby. It was an interesting model. It was a standard Watt 4 that had 3 wings fitted to it with a OS 162 stroke mounted on the front. On its first flight, it had some interesting characteristics that I had to get accustomed to. On the second and third flights, I got more accustomed to them, and they did fly. It did fly okay. In the end, I ended up selling it to a chap in Scotland, who I believe it's still residing in his loft. In terms of the Concorde, that was a model, for me personally, I was on a search for numerous years. I've managed to trace its owner now, but unfortunately he won't sell it to me. So it's still sitting in a shed in Andover.
Brilliant. Scott comes back with best ever buy from Martin, a mystery box for 10 quid. I had no idea what was in it. There you go. Well, we've said it.
Did you ever find out what was in it, or did he just throw it straight in the bin? I'm not quite sure.
I think that was the mystery, but anyway.
That was the mystery.
I'll save his last question for the very last question, okay?
Okay.
And you'll understand why. Jerry Keaveney, hello from Ireland. Great show. Right, okay. We've answered that one.
I'm actually off to Ireland tomorrow, so if you know of any model flying clubs in the Dublin region, apart from Phoenix Park, let me know.
Right, there we go. Mark Macy, is the RC hobby growing or in decline?
For me personally, I'm not quite sure. Despite in an average year, I would come across a collection, 200, 250 collections of model aircraft. These could be from people who had only recently packed up, or to people who were packed up 10 or so years ago. But from my perspective, every year I did gain more and more customers, and the business always grew and grew. So I would definitely say the hobby is still in a growing phase. It might have plateaued a little bit, but I'm sure by the end of the year, numbers could increase in aero modelling quite significantly.
Good to hear. Stuart Sutherland, he was just writing to all of us, but saying favourite model from Martin was a Watt 4 Mark III kit, Funjet and Optera 1.2. Worst model was an LX A10.
Yes.
Yeah, you remember this one.
But
part of that could be pilot error.
That was the first time I ever used parcel force to post a model, because good old Stuart lives in the Orkney Isle, so that was quite fun packaging that massive model up.
Brilliant.
It's Isle of Harris or somewhere, isn't he? I think it's
That's
Stuart.
it. That's it. Isles of Lewis.
On a remote island up in Scotland
That's
somewhere.
It.
Yeah.
I remember his dress off by heart, but I won't say it on camera.
Well, he says thank you very much for your help and advice, and wife says thanks for the Haribo. Right. Gary Knight, Martin, now that you are no longer selling models, well, Scott Edwards is asking the same. I was saving this till last, but there's 2 questions here. So both are saying, what are you doing now? What are you doing in the future?
Unfortunately, I cannot say what I'm up to in the future. There are just for the element of
clearly the next James Bond, then
of suspense. I could be, Andy. It's definitely so for me. Despite I'm no longer buying and selling model aircraft, for me it's always been, even through the business activity, it's always been something I've done for fun. Model aircraft for me is very much of a hobby. The business side of things was also just a hobby. It just so happened it turned into a business overall, but I always just did it for fun, and I got a lot of enjoyment from just running everything, traveling around the country, and getting involved. So there might be some projects in the future to do with model aircraft, but in a less buying and selling sense. And for everything else, unfortunately, you'll just have to wait and see.
Andy, would you like to tell him what Scott reckons he's going to be doing, or do you want me to?
Top Gun 3, yeah.
Top Gun.
Rupert.
No. Could be, but I can't confirm or deny.
Brilliant. Well, we've got through all of the questions. We're still looking for others that are coming up with models. I think, a Watt 4 keeps cropping up all the time. Lots of Watt 4s. You must have turned over a fair few of those in your time.
Yes, quite a lot of Watt 4s.
I have a question. Did you ever sell a model that you wish you'd kept?
Yes.
Yourself? Yeah.
Yes.
What was that?
That was, I've got a photo of it here, if you can somewhat. It was an 500cc Yak. I purchased it just over 5 years ago, and I sold it a little while later. And it was one of the very few models I really regretted selling. So when it came back up for sale just over a year ago, I made sure to purchase it back. As soon as I saw it come up for sale, I purchased it and drove all the way down to Cornwall and get it. And that is one I won't be letting go again. So that was definitely, there has been models I've regretted selling. I wish I could buy them back. And that one was definitely the number one I regretted selling.
Yeah.
Barry, have you got any questions for Martin?
No, I had a comment more than anything. I think Martin gave some really good advice there. You know, I think we've all been doing this. You and I and Andy been doing this hobby a long time, and he gives some really sage advice there. And I also would like to say, it shows how cheap you can, the kind of percentage of retail prices that Martin was quoting. It shows how cheaply you can be involved in this hobby. You do not have to spend a whole load of money to have real good fun in this hobby. That was the observation that I made listening to it. And, I thank Martin for pointing that out.
No problem, Barry. That's a good point you've raised. I think out of all the models that have passed through my hands, I've had large turbine models, large petrol models, whatever it is, and I still think the most fun I had was a Bixler I purchased for £7 on eBay. That thing was indestructible.
Yeah.
Filled it with LED lights, flew it at night, just flew it over and over again, and it was just so much fun. And that was £7. You don't need to spend £10,000 on a model to have fun. You can just simply spend £7.
Yeah. And I think that shows that there is a good future for the hobby. No doubt about it.
I mean, you pick up on that, Barry. I mean, it's quite interesting. A lot of the talks that we've had, people say, how do you get into it? And it's not always reaching for the top. It's actually picking up good second-hand product, from somebody who's a trusted flyer that and that's always worked very well. I mean, you have been a great advocate of that, Barry, I know. And, and I think from my point of view, I think upcycling is always a good thing. It goes well. A lot of us, we want the best models all the time, but actually, you can have some fun with others. So no, that is good. We've got two more questions coming just before we've got 2 minutes to go. All the time. Although we don't go too brutal on the time there. Mark Macy, who makes the best ARFs?
Good question with ARFs. I think it really depends on ARFs, is what sort of discipline you're wanting to get into. If you're wanting warbirds, you've got Hangar 9 and Top Flight. If you're looking for aerobatic models, you've got Extreme Flight and Sabart. But then also Hobby King have made a huge range of very good models, such as the EFX Racer and other models along those lines. So I think there's no real definite answer for that. I'd say on a personal choice, it'd either be Extreme Flight for the big Yak that I'm obsessed with at the moment, or Hangar 9 and the Mustang they do. That's always been another favourite of mine.
Gordon King is asking a question that I was waiting for, and I'm surprised. How did you value job lots from distant sellers, and any horror stories?
Oh, many horror stories. I think quite a lot of, with valuing job lots, it was always based on the things I mentioned earlier on in the slide. So it would be a case of just sort of working out the items. There wasn't really a lot in the hobby that I hadn't purchased or sold in my time. So it was mainly just sort of, you kind of just got a gut feeling on what something was worth. It was never my intention. And this kind of leads on to the horror stories. Sometimes people's perception, they'd see someone turning up in a car or turning up in a van with a wad of cash wanting to buy a load of models, and instinctively think you were offering the lowest amounts possible for the items you were going to see. So it would be a case of, I've travelled all around the country. I think probably the furthest one was on the Scottish borders, when I travelled up to, with the intention of purchasing a large job lot of model aircraft, turn up and find it all rodent damage, and the person wanted exorbitant amount of money. So horror stories wise, it was mainly kind of lost time or people not being honest with what they were selling. To me, that was a very frustrating part when you're trying to manage lots of things and you've lost 1 or 2 days and a lot of fuel expenses and hotels, and it's just lost.
Okay, thank you.
There was a question earlier from Steve Holland.
Oh, hello, Steve. Yes.
And I suspect it's very much he's got some insider knowledge as well.
Yes.
And Steve wanted to know, why did you ram him and not shoot him down?
Oh, well, that's a good question, Steve. Well, as you know, on the Battle of Britain film, I think it is quite easy to get a little over competitive at times, and you might not appreciate the moment when you're actually in the moment, and you might be striving for something else. So although one could have been content with just shooting someone down and watching some smoke coming up their model aircraft, simply flying into them is can be more substantial and entertaining. Yes, it is more definite.
Yeah. Good answer.
And Stuart Sutherland is just reaffirming the definitely more affordable than it used to be, the hobby and sport. Stuart Sutherland also asked, favourite model for windy conditions that's not a Sora?
That's not a Sora. Favourite model for windy conditions.
I would have thought Stuart would have the answer.
That's it.
On the where he is.
where he is. I think he has to go to for a lot of people is the Watt 4 foamy or the Watt 4 model. For me personally, one of the more unassuming models is the very early balsa craft Easy Street. I've got one myself that must be about 20 years old, and I've flown that all over Europe and all over the country. If there's room in my car, it's being squeezed in the car and flown at any opportunity. And with that can fly in any wind condition. It's only a 36 or a 40-inch wingspan, and it's all just a nice size and very enjoyable to be flown in wind or calm conditions.
Brilliant. Martin, look, I think, just great thanks. It's been fantastic. This is going to be a fantastic catalogue for YouTube. Certainly, it's going to be a go-to. I can see that, and I can see there's some spin-offs coming from this. Probably a lot of people setting up their own businesses as well. I can see this happening.
More than that, it's quite easy. If anyone did want to turn it, it's quite easy as a sideline or something. Yes, that's it. I just wish you all the best, and just don't get carried away. I got a little carried away towards the end, but it's just enjoy it. Just enjoy it, and as long as you have fun and you can do anything you like.
Brilliant. No, that's fantastic. And I certainly wish you well on your adventures moving forward, and we're going to keep an ear out and an ie out, see what you're up to, and I'm sure Barry and Andy are much the same on that.
Oh, so next James Bond, I'm sure of it.
If it's James Bond, we're not worthy next time.
Tom Cruise has got nothing
I won't forget.
on you,
I won't
Martin.
forget you guys. Thanks, Barry.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Andy.
No, that's brilliant. Well, I think we can stop the recording, Andy.
Yes.